To call up Corey Padveen. Corey, how you doing?
All right, Adam.
Good.
Hi, everybody.
Corey's an amazing guy. I mean, I got a lot of questions about, are there any good influencer marketing agencies? And I always hate to publicly recommend things when I know that we have many good agencies here and so forth. But since we are featuring Corey, I do want to mention something about him and his agency's capabilities. I mean, basically, Corey thinks about things in an intellectual and scientific way.
Oh, you flatter me.
No, seriously. I mean, believe me, I don't flatter anybody. It doesn't come easy with
it. I'll take it. I'll take it.
But seriously, and he basically looks at marketing data and builds data into strategies, campaigns, and so forth, and is highly focused on the measurability of the outcomes. And he's got a background in economics, but he's done some really amazing pioneering work in things like social equity or things like media measurability, responsive branding. These are all he's turned them into proprietary concepts, but he's the guy that thought about it, and he does have an agency. It's called T2, small t, number 2, and it's www.https t2.marketing. And very easy, t2.marketing. And they're not purely an influencer marketing agency, and I'm not even sure that they do influencer marketing campaigns, but he can tell you that. But what Corey is here to talk about, what we asked Corey to talk about, what he came back with, was number one, what's happened during the pandemic. Today's session is about pandemic influence changes. What's gone on this year? What's happened with platforms? What's happened with digital marketing overall and so forth? And Corey's put together an amazing talk that I can't wait to hear thoroughly. I have all the highlights of it and top level stuff, but I'll turn it over to Corey now. And Corey, you have 45 minutes with questions and answers before we move on somewhere. So take it away. So I'll give you your slides, and then I'll bow out. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, Adam. And just to your point, we do quite a bit of influencer marketing. We owned an influencer network which we just brought in-house. Was She Savvy. Now it's part of our internal network. So feel free to reach out and ask some questions. But today, what I want to talk about and what Adam and I discussed leading up to this session is how has media shifted to be focused on both branding and transactional interaction. There is a lot that you could say about one specific platform or another, but the real focus that I want to get into today is thinking about media according to these two different areas. So first, I'll give you a little bit of background on me. Corey Padveen. Hi, everybody. I'm a partner at T2 Marketing International. T2 has been around for about 36 years. As you may or may not have guessed, I did not found the company, but I have been here for the last several years, and my main focus is on data. Data. I'll leave it to you to decide how you want to say it. I don't pick and choose. But really, my focus is on, my background's in econometrics, and my focus is on using data in order to build strategies. Now, you're probably thinking, of course, a natural progression for somebody who studied economics is to go into a creative field like marketing, of course. But one thing that we've seen grow significantly over the last several years is the amount of data that's out there. And one of the ways that I like to look at things is how that data can be sort of manipulated and skewed, or not skewed, but applied to strategies, to creative. And that's really what built up our focus in social, digital. It's all sort of become one aggregate. And to Adam's point, when he was discussing the permanency of some of the shifts that we've seen, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that we are looking at a transformative experience with some lasting repercussions. And one of those is the frequency and familiarity with which people use digital channels for everyday exercises, whether that's messaging with people, whether it's sharing information or sharing insights with friends. I think that the rate of meme sharing over the last 12 months has increased a few million%. The speed with which news is shared because of social, sometimes accurately, sometimes unfortunately inaccurately, has just exploded. And there really isn't a story or a bit of information or even the release of a TV show that isn't going to get around to your ears and your eyes as quickly as getting the release from the person with the news itself. So today I want to talk a bit about those changes and how we could start to think of these media as front and center focuses for both branding and for transactions. Now, on a personal side, I obviously am Canadian. I'm out in Montreal. We're experiencing a fairly light winter, which is always nice. It's a nice and cool 15 degrees today, Fahrenheit. So it's for those of you who are Canadian, it's about -1, -2 today, which is about 20 degrees warmer than it has been over the last little bit. But I still spend my entire time outside, skiing, playing hockey. I play squash, which is a winter sport technically. And on a personal note, I also collect antique shoehorns. I have a pretty big collection of those. I keep buying them at auction, and eventually my girlfriend's going to ask me to keep them at the office because they take up quite a bit of room. And in keeping with Adam's story of how quarantine is going, well, I wanted to let you all know that I cleaned up for this today. So I appreciate the invite here. It has been a long time coming, but I felt the least I could do is shave and get a haircut. So thank you for that. And that quarantine is sort of leading us into why we're here. What exactly are we going to be discussing today, and what exactly is the purpose of this discussion? Well, we've seen a lot change. As Adam mentioned, as I mentioned, there has been some real seismic shifts in how people use media, how people engage with brands, what the definition of a brand actually is. To Adam's point, the rise of micro-influencers has really never been more important because now no longer are people shelling out millions and millions of dollars. We did a few campaigns a while ago where the primary focus of the client, and it was a large hotel brand, and the primary focus when we were in the process of selecting influencers was, well, they don't really meet our threshold for followers. I saw today in the number of followers that a lot of you guys have is the majority of you have under 10,000. The reality is that those have become much more coveted forms of influencers because they are a brand themselves. I also saw that not everybody uses Pinterest as their top platform, when in reality, 97% of the searches done on Pinterest are unbranded searches, and 50% of people searching there are people who are looking with some sort of intent to make a purchase. So what I want to talk about is rethinking the way we think about different platforms, rethinking the purpose of using these platforms in our strategies, and starting to build more of an ecosystem, and that's something I'll touch on later on, but building an ecosystem that takes all of the different benefits and all of the different uses of these media into account. First, I want to look at just two quick statistics talking about branding and transactions. Now, obviously, it's no secret that branding is a primary focus for social. Social media, digital media, 80% of consumers are more likely to engage with a brand if they follow that brand on social. The reason being, brands are able to showcase a personality. So it's no longer just this faceless corporation with a label on the side of a product, but rather there's a personality there. There's a way to connect with them, and there's a way to get through just the product or service that you're offering to actually create some sort of a personal rapport with the people that you're trying to reach. And as far as purchasing goes, the number 52% of marketers, this is from 2018, the numbers obviously have gone up in the last 12 months in particular, but the number of marketers that can directly attribute sales and conversions from social. Now, what I want to talk about today is what exactly is a transaction? How can we start to think of transactions? Because they've changed a lot, and especially in the last few months, we've seen some pretty dramatic shifts in what a transaction is. I think The most obvious transaction would be something along the lines of a purchase. Seems simple enough. It seems like the most likely way to calculate what a transaction is, but we need to start thinking about things as transactional experiences that extend beyond a direct one-to-one money purchase transaction. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to build your business, drive up revenue, but transactions and branding need to be thought of as more of working together rather than looking at things as this is my media strategy, this is my direct sales strategy. They have nothing in common. They need to go hand in hand. And one way to think about that is to look at how these networks have evolved, especially in the last year, and how we need to start thinking about these networks when it comes to both our branding initiatives and our transactional objectives. So what has changed? Well, I think it goes without saying that mobile is the most important thing out here. I know that I've spoken at events for the last several years, and mobile has always been sort of a standalone topic. It no longer is a standalone topic. It is the topic. Mobile is where people are spending the majority of their time. I saw a study, a ComScore study that came out not long ago, and it found that for the first time during the pandemic, people use their phone more than they watch television. And I know what you're thinking. Sorry, that was Edelman study. And I know what you're thinking. How is it possible that when people are sitting at home, sitting on their couch, they're on their phone more than they are while they're sitting in front of the TV? Well, I could tell you from personal experience, and I bet if I put out a poll right now, the majority of you would probably fall into the same boat, that whenever I have the television on, my phone is sitting right in my hand, and I'm either looking up someone from the show who I recognize but can't quite put my finger on, or I looked up the show and I found myself in a rabbit hole of 500 other clicks, only to see that there's a movie that I want to see coming out in 6 months, and now I start watching the trailer on my phone. It turns into a mess, but mobile is where everything is happening. Mobile networks are where people are engaging with brands. They're where people are making purchases. They're where people are signing up and providing information. They're where you're doing the majority of your business and building your brand. The reason being, it's an individual experience. The nice thing about mobile is that it is an almost entirely one-to-one interaction between content and individual user. We've seen the rise in these individualistic platforms. Take Snapchat, for example, it was a long time before brands really grabbed onto it and started using it. But once it was revealed that brands could build these audiences and connect with people in much more personal one-to-one ways, the mechanism of using these mobile and individual platforms allowed for brands to really establish themselves as being thought leaders, really establish themselves as innovators, and show people that in a much more intimate setting. That goes hand in hand with visual media. Mobile and visual go together. People are more likely to read a blog or more likely to read through something that's long form on a desktop. People are much more likely to look at visual media on their phones. I think I don't need to tell anybody here. I saw the numbers. Instagram is the #1 platform that all of you said, or the majority of you, I should say, said is your top choice for social engagement. Well, this is an industry that relies heavily on visual. What I want to look at today is how, despite the fact that so much needs to be visual, it needs to go beyond that. We need to think of all the next steps, which might involve both mobile, desktop, visual, written, video, etc. To that point, social has gotten much more agile. What does agile mean? Well, agile means that things change. You may have seen it actually just Friday when Twitter announced that they're planning on possibly starting to charge people for tweets. You may have seen, if you work on the business side or the marketing side, you may have seen last week that Cision purchased Brandwatch and is now creating this huge PR network that includes both social listening and direct PR press release and press content. You may have seen Facebook's Australian news ban and then the shift in Facebook's policies, and now Facebook allowing for news, but in a different context. The fact is, there is so much happening and so much changing on an everyday basis. I long for the days, Adam mentioned 2010, the simplicity of having Facebook and Twitter, and maybe there was a couple of other little things that were popping up that you could check out. Well, today, I can guarantee you that at least half of you are desperate to see if I talk about how to use TikTok or what Clubhouse is, both of which have been on these meteoric rises and popped up seemingly out of nowhere overnight. And video. Video it's the commanding force for engagement. It's the commanding force for sales, sales driving, for branding. It is the most used and most engaged with type of content out there. And with platforms like TikTok, with platforms like YouTube, with platforms like Facebook, I mean, everybody, Instagram, Reels, now Fleets on Twitter, you name it. Video is where the focus is shifting, and the networks, unlike where they may have been before, dictating how things work, networks are now responding to demand because this critical mass of users are telling us how they want to engage with content, and networks are responding accordingly. We need to be able to respond with them and create the content that people want to engage with most. Now, how do we know which avenue is right? There are a lot of networks. I can only imagine the daunting task that comes with having to do your work and also having to figure out, why is it that my niece is telling me that I absolutely need to be using TikTok? What if I do it wrong? Why is everybody saying that podcasting is the future when I don't even know where to get started with a podcast? Well, the idea that you need to be doing everything because people are doing it is one of the biggest mistakes people make. So what I want to talk about is thinking about these things in terms of your objectives, and then analyzing the market, analyzing the networks, and figuring out the best path forward. Let's take a look just really quickly at a comparison. I know this goes without saying for a lot of you, but I do want to just get a sense, or I do want to provide a sense of the differences between branding and transactional media. Obviously, the branding side in the context that we're discussing here today is where you're building your voice, where you're building your network, and how you're sort of establishing your influence with an audience that you're generating loyalty from. So those networks and those media can be pretty broad in terms of what network it is, what type of content it is, but the focus is really on establishing who you are and connecting with people in the places where they're most likely to be talking. When it comes to transactions, this is where you're making the pitch. It generally is more along the lines of timeline rather than network. We'll get to that shortly, but this is where you can focus in on, take this deal, here's the offer, here are my services, here's what I can do for you. It's not right for everywhere. It is something that's definitely going to turn people off if it's done in the wrong way. And like I said, most importantly, it's going to turn people off if it's done at the wrong time. So we need to be thinking about these things both in terms of platform and in terms of timeline. So let's take a look first at how branding channels and branding media work. I mentioned video. Video has really just shown to be the most engaging, not just with millennials and Gen Z, but also moving into Gen X, moving into, I mean, if you've spent any time online during the pandemic, one of the things that you've noticed, if you spent any time online, while you spent so much time online during the pandemic, one thing you probably noticed is 80-year-olds developing huge followings while they share things on TikTok. If you have followed Mandy Patinkin, you'll see that he and his wife have become major TikTok stars because they've been showing their lives, or their son has been showing their lives online and sharing that to Twitter. If you haven't, by the way, on a quick side note, I strongly recommend taking a look at Mandy Patinkin's Twitter, because it's been a lot of fun to watch him and his wife in quarantine. It's been an enjoyable set of content. But right there, that would be an example of branding content. It's just showing who you are through video, showing some personality, and connecting with people by showing relatable experiences. Mobile native apps are another means through which people are engaging in that one-to-one nature. I mentioned networks have been moving far more individualistic. People are looking for more concentrated brand engagements and brand experiences. Mobile native apps being apps that are native to mobile devices. So Instagram, TikTok, Clubhouse, these are means through which you can really establish a brand. Clubhouse it's new, but I think it's a perfect example of showing a way to establish your thought leadership, showing a way. If you haven't been invited to Clubhouse, ask around, see if you can get an invite, and just check it out, because that's where you can go to share, establish yourself as a thought leader. It is a place where people can communicate, and it's really about as far from a transactional platform as you can find, because it's just about people talking about a subject. That's where you can really start to develop these relationships and showcase who you are, while also featuring what you do as an aside, but it's about the relationships. And then, of course, in that same vein, you have visual media. Visual media being similar to video, anywhere and anywhere and anything that you could think of where video is featured. I mean, you even look at some podcasts and they get more video views. There are radio shows that get more video views, and they have listeners on satellite. So there's really a huge need to have visual components. I don't need to tell anybody in this audience how important visual is, because visual is one of the first entry points into that transactional timeline. A couple of examples, like I said, your blog, your podcast, Instagram feeds, if you have a TikTok channel, these are all types of branding platforms. While they may have, Instagram has its shops, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's any less of a branding platform. It also, on the shop front, doesn't mean it's any less of a shopping platform. It's the type of content that's being created, and it's how you're using the platform that determines where along the timeline it's going to work as a branding component, and where along that purchaser or where along that individual audience member's lifeline it works as a transactional component. Basically, goal: show who you are, build your influence with key audiences. That's why you may have completely different audience types or completely different audience objectives depending on the network that you're using. Ultimately, however, the branding side is where you really show who you are and start to develop a relationship. Let's take a look at some transactional channels. Obviously, the easiest ones are networks that are built for it. Shopify, BigCommerce, for example, networks where the place is to sell. But when you also look at the embedded shops, the thing about embedding shops is that those shops don't have to be product specific. And that's where I want to touch on this idea of transactional. Especially in the last 12 months, we've seen the term transactional mean something completely different. It's no longer just click to buy. Click to buy obviously is significant. We've seen a 100+% increase in year over year by month sales on for everything ranging from house and homeware to clothes to groceries. So click to buy is important, but transactional media, embedded shopping in your Facebook shops or in your in Twitter, in Instagram, all of these, in Pinterest, for example, all of these can be transactions related to data collection as much as they are transactions related to direct sales. Data collection needs to be at the heart of so much of what you're doing, because that data is going to dictate how you create content. It's going to dictate who your audiences are. You might find in the process of collecting this data and engaging in email sign-up transactions that you have an entirely untapped market of a new audience of people that you weren't originally trying to cater to. So data needs to be thought of as transactional as much as your actual direct sales or as much as your requests for consultation. And the last one is direct messaging. I'm not sure how many of you have taken some time to put together AI chatbots. It's one example that I have up here. SMS chatbots, sales bots. They are, some people might find them creepy, but millennials and Gen Z do not. there is a huge demand for people who are looking to get answers, who do not want to answer a phone, who don't want to talk to somebody. I know that the idea, I have friends, and I'll be the first to admit I have been guilty of this as well, who when the phone rings and it's an unfamiliar number, or when I'm being asked to call in somewhere, it's something you have to mentally prepare for. It's just a generational thing, which is why chatbots have really increased in terms of their value when it comes to transactions. They are inexpensive, they are easy to set up, and they are great ways of scaling your engagements with audience members. People are familiar with the process. It allows you to create decision trees, and it's just a great way to sort of generate new funnels for people without having to spread yourself too thin in terms of getting that first point of contact with a prospective new client, or with a prospective purchaser if you're selling product directly. Obviously, I think it goes without saying, the goal of these transactional channels is to build your business, data collection, audience development, and start making money with what it is you're selling. Now, with that in mind, I want to talk a bit about a social ecosystem. The social ecosystem is a mix. You may have noticed I mentioned there is some crossover here. We have crossover between some of the channels. I mentioned Instagram, for example. Instagram is as much a brand building initiative as it is a transactional initiative platform. The reason being, there are components of each that you're going to leverage at different points along the buyer timeline or along the audience timeline. What you do at those different times is really how they change from one platform to another. So there needs to be a mix. You need to be thinking about these things as continually evolving based on where people are along that timeline, whether they're first walking into the door or if they're reaching out to you because they want to talk to you about some help. One thing to know is that these last 12 months have made the process of engaging with brands entirely digitally has become much more widely accepted. I'm going to talk briefly about how that process goes, but you need to be prepared to engage with prospective customers, with prospective clients, and with your audience in general, virtually anywhere. Oh, there I am. Adam, did we lose my my slides? I think we may have. Not to worry, they're still there.
No. We have your slides. We have your slides. Sorry.
No, don't worry. I promise everybody they're still there. There we go. So that's good. That's good timing, because now I get to go into my pipeline, or into my ecosystem. So looking at building this ecosystem, there is a lot that goes into it, but I do want to focus on a couple of key areas. First and foremost, you need to establish your goals. I think people do not give enough time to actually establishing what they're trying to do. And one of the big detriments that comes with is you end up trying to do absolutely everything, and you end up doing nothing perfectly. You just try to get, you're working with 25 networks, but you haven't made a new video on, let's say, YouTube for 6 months. You are posting to Instagram 8 times a day, but you haven't sent out a tweet in a week and a half. So you really need to establish your goals, figure out exactly what you're trying to do. If you're trying to become an influencer and build an audience on Instagram, that's a pretty easy one. If you're looking to start selling direct, or if you're looking to become a brand sponsored influencer, creating influence video, or creating videos underwritten by brand sponsors on YouTube by reviewing product, there's another area. But you need to establish what your goals are, and then you can start to figure out where the audience is that you want to reach in order to achieve those goals. From there, you're going to want to create a circular content strategy. I'll talk about what a circular content strategy is in a minute, but the idea, just to give you a sense of how it works, is that every single area where you are sharing content, every single thing that you have in your pipeline as far as where someone can engage with you, is connected and doing something intentionally along the entire journey of an audience member. You'll want to choose the right channels from there. I'll talk a bit about some of the ways that those channels can be selected in a minute here. And then you're going to want to start feeding your funnel. So there are a lot of steps involved before you go live. And I understand a lot of people are already up and running, and a lot of people are engaging with their audiences and building up new audience bases and building up your business. And that's great. This is not a process that needs to be done at the outset. This is a process that you can do today. The goal really is just to sit down, take some time, and plan social as part of your business rather than thinking about them in silos. For a long, long time, social, I know that a couple of years ago, someone I was speaking with she was speaking right before me, and she said, I hope one day that we stop talking about social media and start talking about communications where social is assumed as part of it. And that's really where we are now. And Adam mentioned the skyrocketing of adoption in the last few months or the last 12 months, and really the permanency of that adoption is here to stay, which is why we need to think of social, sit down and rethink these strategies where social is as much an integrated part of everyday transactions and branding initiatives as, let's say, your website or any other platform where we traditionally think of as being the key to our overall strategy. Social needs to be thought of in that same vein. Now, how does a circular content strategy work? Well, basically, let's take a look at an example. Let's say you share a project or you share a design on Instagram. You then tell people to check out your YouTube channel for more. You put a link in there if you're going to do an ad. You link people to a video discussion on YouTube, where in that project you can have in the description, you have a link to your website where you have details of the products, details of the process. You could ask people for information if they're more interested. That information is then fed into your customer relationship management platform, where you could have an automated email go out. That automated email can be something that gives people an option to subscribe to other channels, or an option to receive, let's say, a document, or it gives them an option to request more information about your products or services. Then you can create a custom offer, feed that into a direct communication, whether it's an SMS or another email, or if you have them on a messenger platform, you can connect them there, personalize the pitch, and then continue that process over and over. It is really about thinking. The idea with a circular content strategy is that at no point can anybody hit a wall while they're engaging with your brand. You constantly have to be allowing for them to communicate. You constantly have to be allowing for them to engage with you, whether they are on your YouTube channel, whether they're watching a video on Instagram, whether they're emailing you or they're on your website. You don't even want your website to never allow for someone to hit a wall. You always want there to be, check this out, check this out. Keep people clicking, keep people engaging, and keep them within this ecosystem that you've built. Now, before we get into some questions here, I want to go over a couple of tips and best practices. Nothing too overwhelming, but I do want to talk a bit about some of the ways that you could start to think about this so that it's easier to undertake a process like setting this up. First, set realistic expectations, set realistic objectives. If you're going out there, I think a great example of that is today. Congratulations to the people who are on here today who have over 1 million followers. That is not an easy thing to do, and it's important for everyone who's sitting there with under 10,000 followers to know it's okay not to have 1 million followers. It's a great thing to do. It's a difficult thing to do. If you can get there, that's incredible. But if you sit down on day one and say, my goal is 1 million followers, well, you're going to be disappointed when it takes a lot longer than you're hoping for these things to happen. Even people who have viral content and it just blows up. You must see memes on Instagram all the time. You must see jokes recurring. It doesn't mean that the person who originated it is getting any followers. I mean, there are people whose tweets are captured and shared millions of times. They don't have 1 million followers. The way of viral growth that was once a lot easier to do is not anymore. So set objectives that are easier to achieve, set objectives for both the short and long term, and start working towards those with a strategy rather than just looking at something lofty that is going to be much harder and doesn't really have a map to achieve. To that point, you'll want to make sure that any goal or any objective that you set for yourself, you know exactly how to measure. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. Another major misstep that people make is they don't establish benchmarks. They don't establish key performance indicators. The question I always ask when I'm running an audit for a client and I see that they don't really have a metric for success is, how could you know if you're achieving your objective if you're not even sure what you're measuring for? How do you measure against something if you haven't established what those measurement criteria are? If you haven't put in the right tags, if you haven't put in the proper links, if you haven't put in the proper metric measurement criteria, whether it's on your website, on social, if you're not using Facebook pixels for tracking people who are coming from your website, etc., how could you possibly know whether or not you're succeeding? So know how you're measuring your results and know what you're measuring for. Also, to that point, you have to be ready to adapt. I mentioned that agility is one of the key features that we've seen rise in social, especially in the last year. We've seen so many changes happen so fast. You need to be able to adapt your strategy regularly. If you see something new, if there's a new opportunity that you want to take advantage of, take a look at your strategy, see where it fits in, and find a way to make it work as opposed to just dive in head first and hoping it's not the deep end. I mean, the shallow end. To that point, stay open, stay agile to new platforms. You don't necessarily need to be using every single platform, but you don't necessarily want to brush something off because you don't understand it or it's just something that you're not comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with jumping on camera, then you probably shouldn't be getting involved on TikTok. But if you can find a way to get involved with networks that are popping up where there seems to be a lot of chatter, where there seems to be a lot of engagement, see if there's a way to fit that into what you are comfortable with doing. These are the goal for a lot of us here is to be influencers. The only way to do that is to establish some influence by getting involved in the networks where people are spending the most time and people are engaging most frequently. With that in mind, do not take on more than you're able to handle. So often, and this is especially true with people who are getting involved in social, people who are trying to build influence where it's not their main source of income. Anna mentioned that a lot of us have jobs outside of influence, outside of being an influencer. Not everybody here is sitting with 1 million followers that they're able to leverage as a key driving source of revenue. When it is a secondary factor to your primary business, you do not want to be spreading yourself across 35 networks, especially if you're the star, if you're the influencer, and if you're the one handling all of the content creation. You cannot be expected to do it right when you are absolutely everywhere. You need to look at these networks, figure out who your audiences are, figure out what your objectives are and how best to achieve those, and then pick and choose the networks that are right for you, trying different things along the way. Social is a serious investment. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and it's simply not feasible. Unless you're a multi-billion-dollar company and you have the luxury of a 30-person marketing and communications team doing all sorts of different aspects in different parts of the world, that's great. But if you're on your own and you're trying to use social to build your brand and drive up transactions, pick and choose the networks where the audiences are and you can achieve your goals. With that, I do want to jump into some questions. I have all my information up here. You could always schedule a meeting with me while we're here for the next couple of days, but let's dive into some questions.
Thanks, Corey. That was amazing and informative. And like me, you tried to squeeze a career's worth of knowledge in 30 minutes. So well done.
Thank you.
We do have a number of questions for you, Corey.
Sure.
I'll go in reverse order. Number one is, do you think that they're going to be opening up Clubhouse to Androids, or is it an Apple-owned feature?
So right now, Clubhouse it's not an Apple-owned feature. It's an independent feature. I don't know if anybody saw about 2 weeks ago, Mark Zuckerberg joined it. So keep an eye out for the Facebook version coming to a phone near you. But Clubhouse right now, it's sort of an accidental success that has just blown up overnight. So you have to assume that they're in the process of getting some significant funding as well as developing Android. But the process for developing on Apple is usually what comes first. And that's just because of the much more restrictions in getting onto the Apple Store. So you should expect to see Android come out fairly soon. Otherwise, you could expect some sort of a major overhaul where it's where there's a web-based version for Android coming. But yeah, it'll be available everywhere, and it should open to the public instead of just by invite only. Not too long after that, if not before that.
Thanks, Corey. And the thing about Clubhouse too, the other night, Wednesday night, of last week, I saw a great broadcast on what it was about architects and home and garden photographers and what they can learn from each other. And it was fascinating to listen to. I really wanted to jump in as a vendor and a customer.
Well, look, it's a really cool thing because people are actually just having conversations with strangers, but it's sort of the reason why it's so popular is because there really isn't this pressure to do it right. You just got to go in there and talk about what you know, which is great for showing your expertise.
Yeah. Corey, you mentioned Pinterest, and we do have a question about it.
Yeah.
I also too. For our magazines, Pinterest has been and remains amazingly the number one piece of referral traffic to our websites. Always has been. Most bloggers know that, and so forth. And I know that they've also added a e-commerce piece to it very recently. But we have a question about how relevant is Pinterest really these days? And this person has basically abandoned it because of relevance.
Sure. Pinterest has increased. They just passed the $1 billion annual quarterly revenue mark. They increased. I think they're the third largest social network in the United States right now, in the United States right now. They have increased their numbers, especially in the last year, by about 56%. And they're currently, as far as driving revenue, that's really their goal right now. They have their ads at dashboard, but they're really trying to get people to click to purchase. And design, especially, is an area where they are looking to have a significant rise in the use of the network for that reason, being that, take a picture of a bathroom, let's say, and then send people to a website where they could buy every item that they see on the counter. With a referral commission going to Pinterest, they want to look at themselves as sort of an affiliate platform for a lot of these designers, for magazines, for e-commerce platforms. So the goal is to do something similar to what LinkedIn did with content, and shift to be more transactional, as opposed to just being a place where people are sharing. And they've been really, really shifting their strategy. So I think, looking at it from that context, because people are looking at it for inspiration, it's worth giving it another look, especially with the changes they've made this year to their back end.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Corey, we have a couple more questions. One question is, how do you feel about, based on seeing the campaigns that you guys have executed, how do you feel about static photos on Pinterest or Instagram posts versus Reels or TikTok?
Static posts are, there's been a pretty seismic shift in static posts generating engagement outside of travel, because people still like to see the open road, and they still like to see, you've seen a lot of van life popping up significantly during the pandemic, but static photos have really shifted to be more humor based rather than design based. Design has been shifting really, really heavily towards Reels. You've been seeing a lot of design focus in short form Instagram video, but the benefit is that design being so inherently visual, there's static photos are still great, especially when we're talking. I mean, if you look at AD's posts have tags of all the designers in the posts that they share to their Instagram page, creating sort of the cross between static photos and video in a collage that you're putting together, in a series that you're putting together, is really beneficial for showing, let's say, one giant room, highlighting different aspects, and then showing a walkthrough video. So there's a lot of creative stuff you could do where static photos still generate a lot of interest and a lot of engagement, and that includes ads.
Thanks. I think you covered this, but maybe you could just give us a sentence or two just to clarify. We have a question about what the difference is between brand building and e-commerce, and do they go hand in hand?
Yeah, so they absolutely do. And again, it's a question of where along the timeline of an audience member's engagement you are. So if your ultimate goal is to sell a product, unless you're selling stuff at a discount, unless you're really getting to or engaging with people with some sort of an offer, or I don't know if I'm sure you've seen, if you're willing to spend tons and tons of money to just get your ad in front of so many people that they have to buy. Yeah. It is the brand building aspect is how you get people to see. I mean, we've some of the most successful ad campaigns we've done have been through reviews, just promoting reviews, showing short video of people talking about why they love a product. It's really about showing the community aspects of the product as much as it is, and about you as much as it is about, it's a great deal, it's a great product, it's wonderful craftsmanship, you got to check it out. There's a lot to do with connecting with the brand.
Okay. We have two more questions and we have 2 more minutes. So
sure. Make them quick.
Why don't we do this? Question is, how is it possible to prevent Pinterest from receiving affiliate commission off of our design photos? Because it's a problem since many designers have their own affiliate links in the posts that they're creating.
Right. So if that's the case, then you could simply just not set it up. That's not how Pinterest is operating right now. If you want to link from Pinterest to a sales portal, that's fine. We could still do that. If you're using an affiliate link and sharing that content on Pinterest, that affiliate link is still going to be tracked through your own affiliate tracking. It's really more if you're going to start creating shops and shopping links directly within Pinterest. But if you're linking off site, that's no problem. You could still just use your own links.
Okay. This last question may be a softball for you. And if
sure.
I play hockey too, but I grew up in Boston and I play in Boston. So I don't have a great Canadian accent, or I would use it. But the question is, do you have any advice for this Canadian influencer that's watching this broadcast that is particular to our market?
To our market, as in Canadian market?
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate that it's getting so much warmer, because one thing that has been, I've seen a lot of content lately that's really been about winter themed design, but seasonal design. The benefit of being Canadian is that we have a clear 4 seasons, and seasonal design. I've seen just so much success with seasonal design content coming out of Canada, especially out of BC. I'm not sure if you're on the West Coast or East Coast, but the natural beauty of Canada, then having that as a backdrop against interior design and how that's worked, how you've made into the interior work with the natural aspect, seen a ton of success with that, especially while people have been at home and design has been such a focus with the outdoors. People have loved it.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to close with, Corey? I think we're a little bit just about out of time, but
no, but yeah, I appreciate. Thanks to everybody for coming in. You could always feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer questions, happy to help out. So thanks again to everybody, and thank you, Adam, and the whole team over at Connect.
It's our pleasure. By the way, all of you, if you'd like, and I think Corey can accommodate some of it, if you would like to set up a meeting with Corey, you can do that on the platform. Just find Corey on the platform, send him a meeting request, and you can chat for a couple minutes, whatever you guys have, whatever it is that makes sense for you guys. And before Corey leaves, because we do have just like 30 more seconds, I'm going to just answer a question that somebody asked me after mine that I couldn't exactly put my finger on. There was a question about one particular, I'd love to know the source of your source of your followers and future choices chart. And that was, and that basically was a study that Global Web Index and Influencer partnered on towards the end of 2020. I think it's worth getting if you can. It was fascinating to me, and you'll see one or two of my charts that I borrowed from them on it. So with that, I'm going to thank Corey, and
Thanks, everybody.
again, I hope, Corey, that maybe you can find a way to make it to one of our live events when we.
Yeah, that's the hope. Well, yeah, and happy anniversary, everybody. It's the 1-year anniversary of our 2 weeks to flatten the curve. So hopefully we don't have to spend another year before our next one. But
Okay.
let's keep our fingers crossed.
So as a Canadian, you can say that.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you, Corey, and just hang in, folks, and I'll tell you what's next.